My name is Kara Thompson, and I'm going to be talking about herbicide resistance caused by Roundup and the company Monsanto. You might have heard of Roundup. It's the most popular weed killer in the world by a lot, and most of you have probably used it or seen someone use it to kill weeds in their yard. It's extremely effective at killing. In fact, the official term used for it is broad spectrum, because it will literally kill any living plant that it touches. And most people use it residentially on their own property and in very small doses. This is okay because they're killing individual weeds. But the problem is when Roundup is used on the commercial farms that grow crops to feed this world. And because Roundup kills everything in its path, it's detrimental to the crops when farmers spray it. Roundup's main ingredient that allows it to be so effective is a chemical called glyphosate. And according to the EPA, glyphosate is currently deemed safe to use by people in any amount of concentration and for any period of time. This will be very important later. Roundup also created the problem of herbicide resistance. This is when weeds get sprayed by Roundup so often that when they grow back resistant to it, meaning that it requires higher amounts of Roundup to effectively kill those weeds. This is much like when a drug addict abuses substances so often that they require more and more and more of it in order to chase the same high. They've developed a resistance to that substance. Monsanto, the creators of Roundup, seized this opportunity to mass produce the world's first genetically modified seed in the 90s. At this point, you're probably thinking okay, well, what is genetic modification? In this case, genetic modification is when scientists that work for companies like Monsanto, they take a seed like corn, soy, or cotton, they alter its genetic coding or DNA to make it resistant to Roundup. This means that when farmers would spray Roundup, it would affect just the weeds and not the crops. This would be like scientists altering our DNA to make us resistant to cancer, or like taking the COVID vaccine in hopes that it would protect you from the virus. On its face, this seems like a reliable solution to Roundup's power. However, there are many unintended side effects from this. Because crops are now genetically modified, commercial farmers that are employed by Monsanto can spray as much Roundup as they want because there's no regulation against it. This is an issue that started in the 90s when Monsanto first created the first genetically modified soybean seed. Today they also have Roundup Ready cotton, Roundup Ready corn, Roundup Ready alfalfa, and there's many other crops that are also genetically modified. Right now, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, over 90% of corn, cotton, and soy grown in the U.S. is genetically modified to herbicides and pesticides like Roundup. Okay, well, why is that important, and why does that matter? Because almost 100% of U.S. crops are modified, the spray of glyphosate has increased tremendously, and there's no regulation to control it. There are also detrimental environmental and public health consequences that come from this. At this point, I think it's important to talk about the hypocrisy within the agribusiness industry, specifically Monsanto and their shady business ventures that have plagued them with a destructive reputation for decades. When Monsanto was registering glyphosate as a safe chemical through the EPA, there are email exchanges that came out between executives from Monsanto and representatives from the EPA, and they made arrangements to declare glyphosate as safe no matter what the test came back as, regardless of its toxicity levels. Okay, well, what kind of problems does this create? As you can imagine, having a very toxic chemical on the market for people to use as much as they want is not healthy for both people and the environment. There are many cases in the U.S. throughout the past 2 decades where people have been in close contact with Roundup for periods of time and then they end up contracting fatal diseases. According to Courthouse News, one case in particular ended up costing Monsanto over $200 million. A school groundskeeper who was responsible for managing the weeds on the property and maintaining standards would spray glyphosate, and he was diagnosed with lymphoma, which is a fatal cancer that is caused by spraying Roundup for years at a time. Similarly, a consistent Roundup user got diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma at just 30 years old after he started using Roundup when he was 10. And Monsanto continues to deny these effects that Roundup has negative consequences on people. And because glyphosate is deemed safe by the EPA, no action needs to take place. In fact, lawsuits like these have been popping up all over the nation with over 100,000 settlements totaling over $11 billion. These are just the beginnings of what's to come with Roundup. And if no regulation is put in place, these outcomes will persist and it will get worse for people. Roundup also has extreme effects on the environment that contribute to a loss of habitat, loss of biodiversity, and soil erosion. A study published in 2019 highlights the effects of Roundup's main chemical, glyphosate, in the environment. There are a few key findings from this. They've recognized glyphosate in freshwater aquatic ecosystems. Traces of it have been found in crops that are supposed to be resistant to glyphosate, animals that eat these crops, and humans that eat these crops. Conclusions that have been made from this study is that when glyphosate is controlled, a weed will be killed in 1 to 3 weeks, and it doesn't pose a long-lasting or major threat to soil or nearby water ecosystems. However, because when humans misuse it, we spray glyphosate in much higher quantities than is necessary or ideal in order to maintain soil quality and the health of nearby biodiversity. This is because the majority of crops are genetically modified, meaning the spray of herbicide can increase without decreasing crop yields, theoretically, according to the U.S. Department of Agriculture. This study also mentions the effects that Roundup has on non-target plants. As mentioned earlier, Roundup is a broad-spectrum product. And much like broad-spectrum cleaners, they clean all different types of surfaces. Roundup will kill all plants regardless of intention. This study finds that even when Roundup is sprayed on target weeds, the chemical reaches the soil and crops can pick it up through its roots, and it will end up destroying that crop. Overall, the use of glyphosate-dense products like Roundup significantly damage the environment as well as poison people that use it continually. Okay, well, how can we stop this? What can we do to reduce further impacts? Obviously, the first step would be to stop using Roundup. While this makes sense residentially, it's a little bit different for commercial farmers. Weed killer is necessary to guarantee success on your farm. Another solution for those farmers would be to lower the concentration of the product. It would still be effective on target weeds, but it would be less damaging to the environment as well as the people who use them often. However, the most eco-friendly choice would be to seek organic or environmentally friendly weed killers. Studies show that using a citrus oil is similar to the Roundup. And it has some say it has an even better effect on weeds without degrading the soil or tampering with water quality. Some say it even increases crop yields better than Roundup with its GMO seed. As education, action, and support for the climate crisis increases, it's important that we talk about all issues that pose a threat to our future. This issue is important because herbicides like Roundup permanently change our eating habits. Companies like Monsanto feed off of the power that comes from controlling the world's food supply, and they don't care about how it affects our ecosystems or people, as shown by those lawsuits. They completely deny the effects of glyphosate when it's right in front of them. We need to know what happens to our food before it reaches our plate, and we need to stop the glyphosate plague before this, too, becomes irreversible. Thank you.